Well, hi there, guys. It's Tony here from Caveman Props, and I'm back today with another prop talk. My guest today, I'm really excited to introduce to you. Um, they are a kind of prop maker, but better known for set dressing, production design. They've also directed and kind of the what I'd like to say is godfather of creating a entire universe. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today, Mr. Roger Christian.
Hi, hello everybody.
Hiya. Well, thanks for agreeing to talk to us today, Roger.
Not at all. It's always my pleasure.
Right, so obviously we're going to get to a point and obviously talk about Star Wars, but what I like to kind of do with these is kind of take things back a little bit. So obviously before that, kind of what got you into the industry that led you into doing that work?
Um, Pure kind of accident, actually, because I didn't know what to do, but I did art at art school for 3 years and then discovered while I was at art school in Maidenhead, my mate and I went to London. He bought a Mark 7 Jag for like 40 or 50 pounds, and we, like kings, we went to London. We saw Dr. Zhivago in a cinema, in the main London cinema in the West End, and it just blew me away, literally. This whole spectacle, it was one of the greatest love stories ever told, and a massive kind of view of the Russian Revolution, everything. Um, and I saw another film by Claude Lelouch called A Man and a Woman, which was jazz, but it was driving Mustangs from south of France up to Paris, and a kind of strange relationship was just brilliant. Um, and I realized then, wow, this must be, how do you do it? How do you make these films? And to earn money, because my father insisted on me certainly not going to art school, anything like that. Um, I used to put up marquees. There was a company in Reading that put marquees all over the west of England. And as students, we earned fortunes, and it was 7 days a week from morning till night, a lot of work. But one day we were putting up marquees, and I saw this prison camp being built. And I thought, wow, what are they doing? This is real. And I went over to see the guys there, and they said, oh, we're building a prison camp. It's for Pinewood Studios. They're just through the woods there. And so of course, being inquisitive, I got in under the fence. I had to dig a hole, and we got under. And by chance, the stage doors were open. They were filming James Bond. And I just think the lights and the smell and the atmosphere and everything, I just said, this is it. I got to do this. And I went into the prop room, and there were all the gold bars there from, I guess, Goldfinger. And they were gold bars, but they were made of plaster. Everything was fake, and I could see all this stuff. So I decided that I had to work in this industry. And after I knew nobody, I lived in Caversham near Reading, and knew no one, had no connections. One kind producer, because I sent letters everywhere, one kind producer said, look, you've done art, you should really do architecture and get in through the art department because that's your way in. And my determination was so much that I got a second A level and got into Oxford School of Architecture and did architecture for 2 years until the principal there, and he gave me my diploma and said, just go and do what you really want to do now. And so I I somehow I sold my car because I had no money left. I was living at home, and I was thumbing a lift home, and an architect picked me up, and one of his employees worked on Cleopatra. And in Cleopatra, it was such a vast film. They were taking people from anywhere to come and help draw up sets and things. And through that, he introduced me to him, and the guy set me up with an appointment with Charlie Bishop, who was the designer on Department S. And I went to see him. He looked at my folder and said, I'll take you on in an instant, but I'm just finishing the series, but I've made you an appointment down at Shepperton. And I drove down to Shepperton I borrowed someone's car, and I met John Box, who designed Dr. Zhivago.
Hmm.
And he looked at my folder and said, look, I'll take you on. Would you be willing to just make the tea? And I said, oh, whatever, I don't care. And he said, well, it's a big art department, but I tell you, I'll have to let you know when we're starting, but I'll take you on. And he did. That was it. I got the job in there, and slowly kind of making endless tea and coffee. John Box mentored me. I arrived from art school, you know, in architecture with hair down my shoulders and Cuban boots and jeans. And I entered into a world of people in suits and ties telling me to shape up and get a haircut and stop watching all this, you know. I was in cinemas every weekend watching any European movie, anything. Kurosawa I loved all of these different types of filmmakers. I was told to stop all of that. This is a career, you know, and you knuckle down and get on the drawing board and all of this stuff. So John Box mentored me, stopped me getting fired because I would sneak out. And this was Oliver, the musical, and the sets were stunning that John Box designed. I would sneak out to look at the sets and see how they were done, and I would be sent back on straight to the art department. You're not allowed out, you know, and you'll get fired. But John Box saw something in me and mentored me right the way through. And then once they found out I could make models and I could draw as well, I got promoted. And then Charlie Bishop took me on when he started Department S. Randall and Hopcote Deceased, which has become a kind of cult TV series.
Hmm.
And I was very quickly made the set decorator. The set deck had a mental breakdown. They were really tough schedules, but this time they didn't think he would be released. So I became the set decorator, and that was it. I was off and running. And I did a lot of interesting movies. Aikenfield is one where you're in Suffolk. We made the story of Aikenfield, Suffolk. Beautiful film that was the first cooperative, actually. We all were our salaries were part of the co-op to get it made. And I worked on Final Program with Philip Harrison. I was doing interesting movies all the time until, by luck, I was in Mexico on a massive movie called Lucky Lady. That there was only John Barry, Les Dilly, Norman Reynolds, and myself when I joined. It was a massive, massive movie, completely out of control. And I joined. It was written by Gloria and Willard Huyck, who were great friends of George Lucas, and they wrote American Graffiti and they worked on some of the Star Wars. And then they became great friends with John Barry and myself, and we were doing what George kept telling Gloria and Willard. He wanted to make a spaghetti western, and they said, you should go and meet Roger and John because they're doing what you are talking about. They're converting old Mexican buildings into World War. Well, they were it was during the rum running times in America, the Prohibition in the 20s. And Fox had taken on George Lucas all the studios were trying to reinvent themselves. They realized they'd lost their audiences. They weren't getting the box office, and they thought each one should take on a young director. So Universal took on Steven Spielberg. Coppola went to MGM, and Alan Ladd chose George Lucas, who came in with his worst nightmare, saying, I want to make this children's science fiction fantasy. Well, there was no box office. There was no desire for anyone to see science fiction. And I would agree with it because I had not connected to any science fiction film before. They were all like hokey, over-designed, just weren't real. Um, and struggling to get the film made, Fox board didn't really want the film Star Wars, but Alan had stuck by it. So they estimated the film would make $12 million. And they said to George, if you can make it for 4, we'll make your movie. So at the same time, Sandy Levinson in the UK said, we're half the price of America here because of the exchange rates and everything. And there wasn't much going on in Britain at the time in the film industry. And so the budget that he got it to was 8 million, and there were no stages available in Los Angeles. They said, go to England. So that became the reason why he flew down to see John and I. And I was dressing this salt factory with piles of salt. I was making it out. Salt was very precious in those days. It's a very valuable commodity. And so George and Gary arrived alone. George picked up a shovel, was talking with me while we were going round, telling me about the spaghetti western he wanted to make, and so it was science fiction. And I said to him that they haven't appealed to me. I was an avid science fiction reader. I read a lot, and I said, to me, they're just unreal, and that it should be like an old car, that's dripping oil and it's been repaired by the owner and kept going. That's my version of science fiction, like medieval films, and I did like kind of Robin Hood, and I kind of I really liked Alphaville, which Jean-Luc Godard had made on the streets of Paris, and I saw in an independent cinema in London. And with a Bolex camera, he made Paris look like a kind of science fiction city. And it's interesting, only years later, I found out that George actually had a poster of Alphaville in the ranch. So there was a connection there somehow. Anyway, George, we got fired. So in August, I turned up, and that's when we started Star Wars. When we found out there was no money to make it.
But
So
it's something I'd be interested to ask, because obviously I've been through your autobiography, and obviously the budget you had and how you had to dress things was brilliant. Do you reckon that if you had a larger budget, that film would be successful if you could make it how you wanted it? Or do you think it was successful because of the way that it was put together?
I think that played a huge part in it, because any audience watching a science fiction film, you're not connecting to it before this. I never did, and the audience didn't. That's why no one went to the cinema to see sci-fi, even Flash Gordon, I mean, stuff like this. And I think that there's a kind of organic, natural process. John Barry's brilliant idea of taking George to Tunisia. There's an ancient desert world there. All I had to do was dress everything with broken down scrap and make it look like there was a science fiction world there. And he added a few domes on the buildings. We didn't have to do much. So the audience related to it somehow. And I think, if there had been a huge budget, there wasn't the time, because by the time Fox greenlit the film in January, we were shooting in mid-March. So I couldn't make anything anyway. So all these things came together, but I do. I don't think it's an excuse that, we didn't have money, so I had to invent new ways of doing things and new scrap and real things. But I think they're still being done today, even in the big new Star Wars films. They're still using stuff that we created, that using it in The Mandalorian, everything. So I think that's what broke the mold, that suddenly we produced something an audience didn't have to question. And anyone in the art department knows when we're really successful, no one notices. So you're not getting applauded for it. And I think that that I think that all contributed, yes, to an audience accepting a film. I mean, obviously George's script and the vision of it as a hero's journey was brilliant. I mean, just the classic mythology. He created a myth for the cinema age. Um, but I think the used universe, let's call it that, that it was surrounded in, made it in there was no way it was artificial. There was no way this was a film set. This was real.
Yeah, it felt as if it was it in the look of it. It's real. You could imagine this somewhere else. It had that realism to it.
Yeah, I think that it was my personal ambition and George's obviously as well. That was his vision for the first one. So, it's like to me actually, like Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns were more real westerns to me than these huge, massive John Ford cinema epics. So I think a lot of people think the same.
Do you think that your understanding of George's vision as well helped a lot with helping to create it?
Yeah, it was essential. And George, especially in those days, was very quiet. Everyone says he never said much. So the the common denominator were Ralph Quarry's 6 paintings that George bought, and in there was the vision of Star Wars. So we kind of knew what we had to do, which was to make an R2-D2 that worked because there was no way to do it. There was no CGI. There was no really radio control was really primitive in those days, and C3PO. And George's love of Kurosawa, he translated Forbidden Fortress, the two squabbling peasants, into two squabbling robots. So the subconscious connection that existed between us was ideal in that moment. It's like destiny struck. And George, he never, ever, ever refused or rejected any prop or sets, anything that we did. It was just always a smile. I was producing with John Barry what he was envisaging, he wanted, and I think we were doing it probably in a better, bigger way than he probably thought he could get with that budget. And I think that somehow, yeah, I always say, destiny strikes and destiny struck and put us all together. Same with the special effects boys, John Dykstra and Richard Edlund. Destiny struck. They had never done it really before. Same as Ben Burt. No, he'd never done sound before properly on a movie. He was a student at the time. So destiny struck, and I hand it back to George, who has a kind of instinct to hire the right people. And he hired each of us who had a limited amount of experience, which meant that we weren't relying on what I've heard so many times. No, Gov, we don't do it like that. No, no, no. This is how it works. We'll do it like that. None, there wasn't there wasn't any, this is how we do it like that, because it didn't exist. So each one of us kind of, George wrote it and we found a way to make it.
Yeah.
I think all that came to bear, it came to play, yeah. We produced, we managed to get the film made. It was a struggle, I can tell you. But for me, it was an absolute kind of belief in what I'd always wanted to do. It was like a used world. And, when I wrote the book, I went back and analyzed, where did all this come from? How? And I remembered I used to take my dinky toys in the garden and I'd make roads and try to make them look real and paint them and try to create reality rather than just a toy. So there was obviously some innate thing. And also, I kind of went into it when I'm just finishing the documentary based on the book, Galaxy Built on Hope, which will get out at some point. But I went back and I realized and I found out because I was born in Croydon, and the British intelligence fooled the Nazis into thinking that Croydon was actually the center of London. They managed to give them wrong information. So the flying bombs, which were these, I think 165 flying bombs fell on Croydon that were all destined for central London. And the school behind our house was blew, and it shattered all the windows in our house, everything. I think I was sent with my mother because my father was in Java, but I was sent to Devon. But that young age, up until I moved really to Reading when I was 3 or 4 or 5, that world of kind of destroyed London was all around me, you know? So obviously, and I wouldn't remember that, but it was obviously part of my DNA as well. There's a lot of things kind of added up and came together. Like when you look at anyone's life, there are dots and moments that inform us onto who we are. If we can follow those instincts, then we'll follow our true path.
So obviously with the hard work you kind of got there, and obviously Star Wars was a lot more successful than people were expecting it to be. Um, are you amazed by the success that it's still actually going today and that people are still using techniques and ideas that you helped create?
You know, George says it himself. There were only 5 people stood by his side, and that was John Barry, myself, and Les Dilly, and Norman Reynolds, and I think Robert Watts is counted. That was it. The rest of the crew were, even Les Dilly, bless him, when he was asked about it, even now he says, "Well, you know, we read the script. None of us knew anything what this is about. It was all, just didn't make any sense to us." It did to me because I was a great um, I'd read a lot about myth and legends and things. So, you know, and I knew immediately when I read about the laser sword, as it was called in the first script, that this would be the Excalibur. And Excalibur, when you think of King Arthur, you think of that sword and the power of it. And goes back in history. So I knew if it would work, that would become the icon of Star Wars. And because of my interest in mythology, I connected to, you know, and as we all know now, George was mentored by the great Joseph Campbell, who spent his life studying mythology, and he taught George how to create a modern myth and how to layer it. And all of that came into it. So I always thought it would be successful, but to now see it's expanding, it's 4th generation, it's now grown bigger and bigger. And now my world is exploding. I'm getting invited to events and podcasts, and it's never did that before, but it's happening now because of the interest, because there's nothing like it ever in cinema and never will be again. The circumstances to it happening were unique. And I'm an absolute 100% believer in what George gave the world, which is a myth, but he gave people something to believe in, which is why I communicate with the fans all I can, and I recognize how much it means to everybody, and it's telling the right story. Religions try to tell it now, but it's telling the right story of good over evil and friendship and you know a lot of different elements about who we are growing up, which is what the keys that George buried into the saga. So no, and it's fantastic. It's become, and I have a 10-year-old now who's got lightsabers everywhere and Star Wars and everything. And it didn't come because he knew what I was doing. It came from school and from his friends and everything. And then he's found out now he's coming with me to all the events and everything and having a great time.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so it's kind of a it's actually needed in the world, I think, especially in America. The world is a bit of a mess everywhere now. You're living in a country that's I was nothing like the country that I left behind
No.
me when I left for a reason. And there's a need for this. So I think, going back, you've got swords behind you there on the wall. And, this flaming sword goes back into ancient Indian myth. It comes through biblical times. It goes through the warrior, the sword of power and everything. So it got embraced and taking like Buddhist thought and chi energy and all of these things that actually are real that people don't normally have access to into a science fiction story that was made for 9 to 12-year-olds, basically. It's introduced mythology into a huge population globally who never kind of would ever have experienced it or got to understand it. And often it's connecting to the DNA, to the subconscious. It's not connecting. You're not reading this on the surface. So it's an interesting phenomenon, the whole thing.
I think it does. It really does connect with a lot of people. A lot of people connect with the Star Wars in different ways, and I think that's the amazing in which way that it works. It's not just for one group of people. Other people are connecting to it in different ways and taking something away from it.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, one of the main anchors here on television, she's interviewed me quite a few times, and we were talking about this, and she said, I went to the cinema and saw the last Star Wars movie when it came out. She said, I was with my son, and I realized, bang, I flashed back to my father taking me when I was the same age, 10, to see one of the early Star Wars. And she said it gave us something to communicate. So there is a common thing between parents and the children, which doesn't really exist in many other different things. This sport, this soccer, you're in England, soccer. So
Yeah.
soccer is the main communication between families, but it's given a different kind of more of an artistic kind of communicator between families.
We'll move on because obviously you worked on another very popular science fiction series as well. You managed to get onto the original Alien film. So
Yes.
how did that compare to going from Star Wars to working on Alien? Because although there's science fiction, they are two very different um, types of films.
Yeah, well, I knew Ridley well, I art directed commercials for him and Tony, um, and I was on Star Wars. Then I did the final remake of Beau Geste. Then I went on to Life of Brian, and that folded just right before we were going to go to Tunisia. I was designing it with Terry Gilliam, and Ridley had started Alien. He took on Michael Seymour, who designed a lot of his commercials for him. And Life of Brian collapsed when Lord Delfont read the script and said it's blasphemy, and it collapsed. They wanted me to keep going with it eventually. And I was in the London office, John Goldstone, the producer, and Tim Hampton, when it collapsed. And within an hour, Ridley called me and said, can you get yourself down to Shepperton straight away? And I went down there. I went into Ridley's office, and outside area, there were 6 original Giga paintings. And I thought, oh, this is interesting because, I was a big admirer. And they said, look, before you meet Ridley, read the script. So they gave me a script, and I read this script, and I read it in the time, it was 90 minutes. You just went, woomph. It was like the plot was so simple. Um, and I then thought, wow, in Ridley's hands, because I knew what his vision would do. And I went to meet him, and I signed on immediately. I had to start work right away. And then I understood because Ridley said, I'm trying to make a space truck. And it's a language that I'd already understood with George. So again, we didn't have to talk about it. And it's a language that I understood. And he was obviously having a problem. Michael Seymour had never done sci-fi. The set decorator he'd taken on a friend of mine, Ian Whitaker, he did Aikenfield with me, and he was better at Howard's End. He always said when I first met him, I'm great at dipping curtains in tea and making them look stained and old. I don't know what to do with all this scrap metal. Um, and Michael had taken on a young kid who'd never even worked on a film before. He said, "Oh, I can do what that Roger Christian did on Star Wars. I can make old sets for you." And it doesn't work like that. And so, uh, and talking to Ridley, he basically wanted an army truck in space that was really used. And again, and on this one, that was the entire scenario was set in this ship, which was was a kind of gift, really. So I got my boys over because on Star Wars I had to teach the prop boys how to break down jet engines and put them into kind of sections. Because if you look at a submarine, you look at a bomber, they have triplicate or duplicate of everything. It's not just random. You don't just stick it on walls and think it'll work. You have to give it an engineering kind of influence. And so I got them over and I got the buyer to go and buy a ton of scrap like I did. I mean, I bought truckloads. You can't buy a little bit, it doesn't work. And um, it was like a fantasy come true for me, with making the Millennium Falcon was fantastic. When I saw people come on that set when we finished it, just their eyes open, going, wow, this is real. And with the Nostromo, it was a chance to create a full ship. Very similar kind of, sorry. It's a very similar in the way that it was under budgeted because it was the first R-rated science fiction film. So there wasn't the budget to do what was really required and no time, anything. Very tough um, working environment. But again, I used exactly the same techniques. And to me, it worked. I mean, I think Alien kind of we got the whole thing right on Alien, and I always knew it
Yeah.
would work. It couldn't fail with Ridley at the helm.
But as I say, they both have a very different feel, but the context is kind of the same.
Yeah, I mean the when when we started with Alien, Ridley wanted to screen test Sigourney Weaver because obviously the studio would want a star in that part, and he was convinced she was exactly what was wanted. And so he asked me to build him a piece of set because he didn't want to do the usual screen test against a white wall. And so I built him a piece of the corridor as I saw it and got him my pipes and drain piping and PVC tubing and then all the scrap I got from sites, airplane scrap yards. And I also we got a gun made for her that looked pretty much similar in a way to the ones I did on Star Wars, but slightly different because this was a more of a kind of contemporary space. And that basically was the look of the Alien. As soon as they saw it on rushes and everything, that was it. I just went ahead and built the whole ship like that.
That must be nice for someone in your position to be given that go ahead and just go, right, let's just get it done. I trust you.
Yeah, and I think that came from um, from us having made Star Wars, so it gave us some form of confidence, gave them confidence that we could do it, and no one knew how to do it or anything, so they just accepted to really for us to charge and get it done, you know. And Ridley was 100% fighting for it the whole way through. Um, you know, we'd done Duelist, that was it. So there wasn't a lot of confidence. And he was a hugely successful commercials director. Um, and the producers couldn't understand how, if you just made commercials, how could he make this sci-fi movie really? Or that he was there. So there was a lot of tension and struggle to get these things made. The same with Star Wars. So it's they were both labors of love, I would say.
It feels that if there isn't like if you don't have the hard work put into it, or there isn't if it isn't easy and you have to really work at it, it intends to come out as a much better film.
I'd say in the book, I mean, I was working 7 days a week on both these films. On Star Wars, I'd get a takeaway at 9 or 10 o'clock at night on the way home because I was too tired to cook anything. And on Alien, I barely made it through supper any night. I'd fall asleep, sometimes eating. And it was 7 days a week, you know, and it was a huge graft because I knew if I slacked off, then it wouldn't get done. So I had to drive this team into the ground to get it made in that time. And there was, you know, the budget got slashed, 600,000 got taken out of the budget not long before we was a few months before shooting, and sets went out, sets were being cut out. Like Peter Beale was saying, no, we can't afford it, and cutting it out, and we would find ways to do it secretly for Ridley and stuff. It was, yeah, yeah, it was a dedication, both of them, to make a film, and you know, you have to believe, yeah, you have to kind of give it your all if you really believe in it.
Do you think that that's something that's missing from cinema today? Because I've spoken to a lot of people and they said that the industry now is very segregated, that the art department doesn't work with this department. This is whereas before somebody would work on something and see it all the way through to filming, whereas now it moves to different people. Do you feel that that is hindered or helped cinema?
No, I think it's hindered. In fact, I met Christopher Nolan here when Dunkirk. They screened in the IMAX theater here. It was the first time he'd seen it full IMAX with an audience. And I met him afterwards and he said, oh, yes, I know what you do. He said, listen, I don't understand. You did it all. You did everything on that film. And he said, nowadays, I have one department making the cars, one does the guns, one does this, one does that, one does this. And we spoke about it, that there is much more of an engaged, you know, in those days, these designers like John Box, they would employ the costume designer who went under them because everything has to be integrated. And same with John Barry, he was really influenced on John Muller, who'd never designed costumes on a film before on Star Wars. He was a brilliant uh, wardrobe master, handled films like Gandhi and things like that, but he'd never actually designed before, and a science fiction film. You know, we were always working together, even on costumes and stuff. And I think then you are much more integrated into the movie making process with the director because we're very close with them. And if you are all kind of playing the same violin, then you're making a much better film. And I think that, I don't know, to me it comes out of the screen at you, you know. And I watch all the time. I take my son, we go and watch every Hollywood blockbuster, Marvel movies, everything, and they're brilliant. You know, they're big sound. They make them better than anyone else, but in all truth, they don't stay with you. You wait for your next fix. Oh, there's another. Oh, we got a DC coming. Oh, we got a Marvel coming. Um,
You
you
wouldn't go
can
and watch
go.
the same film over again.
No, no, maybe at home, but you know, Star Wars, you can put on that first one anytime now, and you go into it straight away. Alien, the same. You is somehow connected to it, and I think that graft passion, intensity of getting it made does shine through somehow. But these were films being made by filmmakers. They're not like products done to make a massive blockbusting success. They were filmmakers, and that side of it, you get glimpses of it in the UK, France, that films are being made usually with a very small budget, but somehow that's breaking through all the time. But it rarely happens now. I guess there's Christopher Nolan and James Cameron are the two who still does it. And James Cameron movies still, to me, look like they were made with this same kind of integrity and intensity. When I watch Avatar, it's the same, and there's a reason why they're so successful. And he still uses a lot of models. He still is integrating everything into making the best that he can.
It's obviously a shame that there's not more filmmakers like that out there at the moment.
It is, yeah. It's tough. It's a tough world now.
Now, obviously, you mentioned it there before, but you kind of went from obviously doing Star Wars to Alien to the Monty Python's Life of Brian. Now that is a very different picture to work on. But is it good to move to different things so you're not stuck in like one genre?
I think so. And there was no difference between Life of Brian. There was under budgeted. The Pythons never had a good budget. Like they couldn't even afford horses on 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 Holy Grail. They had coconut shells.
That made it to me though. That was brilliant.
Yes, I think everyone. In my documentary, I've got Bill um, Harmon, who made all the stuff for them, and he's got the coconut shells. He was banging them for me. But Life of Brian was pretty similar. Gilliam and I were intent on trying to make a real world. We chose Piranesi influence, and we didn't want to make this usual Roman gladiators and Roman, you know, costumes and everything. We wanted to make it look real as hell. And so going to Tunisia, we were able to do that, film in old kind of forts and castles. And luckily, Zeffirelli had made his TV series, huge one, Jesus of Nazareth, and left some amazing sets behind. So it was the same kind of intensity of making it. And for me, it's great. You're not doing the same thing again. You're doing something completely different. This time we did have a lot of reference, a lot of things to go to that we could look at and see, how the world, we could translate it into something that was, again, like a real Roman world.
It's obviously still an enjoyable project to work on.
Actually, I took the Pythons to Marta, where we filmed Luke's homestead, and we filmed the end scene with the crosses right there. The landscape was so unique. It was so interesting. We filmed all of them up on the crosses for the end of the film there.
That's quite an interesting connection for life. Brian
Yeah, exactly.
was crucified in Luke's
Yeah,
hometown.
yes.
Now, obviously, you kind of made a move from set dressing and that area into directing. So,
Yes.
what kind of influenced that to make you want to start directing a film?
Well, it was, um, yeah, it's interesting how, because the first short film, and I realized after Life of Brian that I had to stick to my guns to get out of this. And I was offered to design Conan. with John Milius, which I would have given in a heartbeat, but I decided to stick to my guns. I was trying to make the short film. I went back to, I thought, I have to go to what my sensibility is, and that's why I wrote this kind of Arthurian mystery, Black Angel, and couldn't afford to get it made at the film school budgets. And it was just by accident. I was watching the sound mixing on Alien up at EMI Studios with Bill Rowe. And I thought the best way to learn is because he was the best in the world at that time, Bill Rowe, brilliant sound mixer. And Sandy Lieberson asked me what I was doing, and I told him. He said, well, do you send it to me? So I said, then he phoned me the next day and he said, listen, do you mind if I send this to George? And I said, no, why? And there was an ED fund at the time. The British government put up £25,000 for a young filmmaker to make a film if a producer would say that it was going to go out and release with their feature. And George was pretty upset with the film that went out with StarWars. It was like almost alienating the audience, he thought. So he said, why don't you use the ED fund and we'll get one made? And they'd chosen, I think, 5. And Sandy said they were never quite sure about them. And when he read mine, he said, do you mind? Let me send it to George. And George came back 2 days later and said, let Roger make the film. That's it. It'll go out with Empire Strikes Back. And being George, he said, no one's to touch it. No one's to interfere. Let him make the film he wants. I'll be the first person to see it when we have a screening. That's it. So
Wow.
in the same way that, and in a way it was a thank you to standing by his side, but he really liked the premise of what I was doing because it was an ancient myth that connected to the subconscious. I knew I didn't have enough money. I had a crew of 9 people, and I was basically determined to be Kurosawa, but in Scotland, and use that mysterious kind of ancient landscapes and stuff. And that was part of my poetic journey, if you like. And that film kind of kicked me into gear, really, and got me going. And then, then I got huge praise from audiences. I got letters from everywhere. George loved it. Spielberg liked it. Everybody was liking it. But the British industry were really condemning me. I had producers saying, oh, go back to being an art director. And, oh, yeah, you obviously can't work with actors, all this stuff. So I thought, right. And again, destiny struck. I met a young producer there, and Paramount, because of Black Angel, Ian Scorer, who was the head of Paramount in England, had decided they'd made one under the ED and it was finishing. And he said, we want to go out Paramount with a bang. I want you to make the film for us, Roger. So I met a young film producer who wanted to be a producer at film school, at the National Film School. And he and I came together one day in his house with ideas for what we would make. And before I did anything, he said, just sit down, have a cup of tea, read this, because it came in this morning. And I just read it. And I read this story written by James Kennaway, who wrote Tunes of Glory. Absolute. Just, I said, well, this is it. We have to make this book. And he said, yeah, but many people have tried to make it. His widow has not allowed anyone to make it. You're going to have to go to London and convince her. So I went to London and I was just brutally honest with her. I said, I don't want to change anything. This is brilliant, that what he's done, your husband, and we're making it as a film. And she gave us the rights. She said, no, you're going to do it, because she basically had offers for television, but she'd always saw it as a little film. And to put it in perspective, James Kennaway wrote, this is the first thing he ever wrote, and he sold it to a magazine called Lilliput for £9 ninepence, but that was a commission that turned him into a professional writer. So it was very
Mm.
important to her. And that film won the Academy Award for Best Dramatic Short Film and kind of got me going. And then, I made The Sender, which was horrendously difficult because Paramount thought I was making a European film when I wasn't. And it's become a massive cult favorite. It's Tarantino's favorite film of 1982. I met him and he he was going through scenes with me when we were on a plane and he told me that he was working in the video store. When it came out in the cinemas, he was dragging people to see it night after night, because Paramount were just not behind it at all, even though I got fantastic reviews. And when it showed on television, he realized they cut scenes out of it. So on his own money as a video assistant, he went to a little post-production place and edited back in on the video store version they were putting out a cut, and he taped it off television. So he cut in my original scenes back into it, and that's what they rented. He said he'd give it to me one day when I meet him again. And I met Guillermo del Toro, who's a huge fan of it. I met all these filmmakers, and it kind of it on one hand it was destroying my career, on the other hand it elevated my career. It's kind of it was an auspicious start to filmmaking for me. But
But
I made one of my favorite movies, Nostradamus, that I made, and again I by now had such an armory, and we made that in Romania right after the revolution. I made a $20 million movie for $4 million. It went into the Spanish and French education systems as the most accurate portrayal ever of a filming of a medieval era or Renaissance era, because I used what was there. I used everything I'd learned from everybody, and made the film kind of, I mean, it's a very powerful story, Nostradamus. And I was determined to give France back its hero because I think he is a huge hero and he was dismissed in France a lot. So I wanted to kind of give them back the truth about who this man was and this amazing period in history.
kind of like give a sort of reverence review that on one hand, like critics had kind of rejected you as well. So you kind of
Yes.
wanted to make this film and put it in there as well.
Yeah, and I think it's given me when George got so criticized after Phantom Menace and called a racist, all this stuff, and I spoke to George about it, and he said, Roger, I can't read reviews. If they're great, you get fluffed up your ego, and if they're bad, you get distraught. So it's best get on with your work, and that's all I've ever done now. I just get on with my work. That's what I'm supposed to do. And as even Christopher Nolan says it, some films you finish and they don't work, but that's part of the process that we go through. So you get on and do your best, And I'm always trying to be innovative. I'm always trying to do things that maybe other people might not have done at the time. Try to do interesting work. It's more important to me.
Doing something you enjoy and
Yeah,
it fuels you is better than
yeah,
trying to make something more successful.
yes. Yeah, just trying to do something interesting. It's a fantastic medium, cinema.
Um, I think that's all we have time for at the moment.
Right.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Roger. I
Not
want
at all.
to obviously thank you for your time. It's been absolutely enjoyable. We will do the shameless plug. Your autobiography is
Yes, thank
available.
you.
I will post a link to the Amazon page,
Oh, thank you.
and just put it out there as well, so anyone can find it in other bookshops as well. And
And it is
there's
a it it it's it was a I really designed it. It's not ego. Oh, look what I did. I did. It's just a blow by blow account how we made Star Wars, how we made Alien, how I made Black Angel, edited by John Rinsler, who ran Lucasfilm for 12 years, the head of literature and a brilliant writer, and helped me a lot on it. And then the last line in the book is, "Don't let anyone tell you you can't, you can." So I did it as a kind of mentor.
I will be honest, I haven't got there. As I said, I've
Oh,
literally only got to the Life of Brian bit, but I
all
will
right.
get to finish.
Yeah, there's not much on Life of Brian. Everyone says that deserves another book, really. So,
Brilliant. And obviously, just to mention, you did mention there's the documentary coming as well. Do we know
so
when that's going to be out?
Galaxy Built on Hope. Yeah, I kind of there's in the making of documentaries, the officials on Star Wars, John Barry I never even mentioned, and because no one knew what we were doing, and John Barry, as you know, died very young on Empire Strikes Back. So I'm the only one that carries the legacy. So I was kind of forced to by the other head of literature, David West Reynolds, to write the book. And then he kept saying, "You have to document this because Star Wars, there's more and more in interest in it. It's going to be studied. You've got to do it." So I did it during COVID, which was not the easiest time, and I did it the same spirit. We got very little money to back it. It was independent. So Galaxy Built on Hope, which is a play on all the words and titles, and I've I've finished it. It was a Blu-ray special, but they've pulled that because they're trying to sell it now to wherever its home will be. I put it into 6 half-hour parts as an episodic because it was a 2 hour 20 documentary to get everything in there. It's very interesting. I have Guillermo del Toro, who's very erudite. He's a major kind of speaker throughout, giving his opinions on things. Gareth Edwards, who made arguably the closest to what George would have made as a Star Wars movie with Rogue One. Gareth is a very he's almost like chapters throughout, giving his opinions and talking about the film. Carl Newman, who made Fanboys, he's in it. A lot of people were interviewed. And I just have to say, like Guillermo, it was COVID time and he wanted to be in it. And he said, "Can you meet me outside a stage? It'll only be you and me and one camera." And that was it. I took one camera. He held the boom for me when I spoke. I held it for him. We did it alone. There were no assistants allowed. It was COVID time. It's the same spirit, that in a way George made his movies. And so that I'm hoping to get out. People have seen it. I'm getting like 5 out of 5 for it. People love it. And again, it's a blow by blow of everything. And I go into the mythology a lot. I really wanted to give Ralph McQuarrie his kind of position back as probably the most important person with George to give a kind of credit to how the whole universe was created from his ideas. Even now, Doug Chiang, who's took over from him, who does all the big new Star Wars movies, head of all the design, everything, says whenever I'm stuck on The Mandalorian or Obi-Wan Kenobi TV series, whenever I'm stuck, I just go in the files and Ralph's already designed it. There's acres of work of his there. So I wanted to give him back a kind of credit and just to really show where it all came from and what George gave the world, really. So I go into a lot of different areas on it.
It's cool. Well, we look forward to hopefully that coming out
Yeah, and
soon.
I hope so too, because it's a legacy. I mean, Star Wars is going to be poured over in universities everywhere. This is actually how it was made. So it's interesting for anyone studying it or liking it, and I get so many stories every time I go to these conventions now, and I do them all the time. There are so many stories, so many questions asked. How do you make the lightsaber? How did you make Luke's binoculars? How did you make Han Solo's gun? Everything. And everybody's thanking me for doing it because I gave them something that they love. It's very nice.
Good. I think it do. It's appealed to a lot of people, and if you do look around, I know I've got the old swords in the back, but in the workshop there is a lot of Star Wars stuff as well.
I'm sure there is.
All right. Well, as I say, then thank you, Roger,
Not at
for
all.
your
Nice
time
to meet
this
you.
evening. So
Yeah.
there we go, guys. Please like, please subscribe, and I will catch you all in the next video very soon.
May the force be with you.